oceans. And it's unfortunate that as humans, that's how we function. Until it affects us, we really don't care very much. But we're glad that interest is now sparked in the oceans and what we're doing. So I'm going to talk about the Cartagena Convention and its protocols and what we are trying to do with our member states to enhance regional ocean governance. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the importance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals so that in the region we are able to actually practice what we're preaching. It's wonderful to see the private sector as a part of this. We have been trying to engage the private sector. It's the private sector, for the most part, who utilize the ocean for making money. So therefore, it must be the private sector, along with other partners, national, non-governmental organizations, and international organizations that must have the solutions as well. We don't want to do it by regulation. We would prefer that it be voluntary compliance, always. So the question that I have for you is, what business ignores 70% of its assets as it goes forward? The ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface. And as human beings, we've been utilizing it, we've been abusing it, and not really doing a lot to protect 70% of our assets. So I'll just talk a little bit about these assets that we have. We've heard already this morning about this is kind of small, the global seafood industry, mangrove swamps that tend to be considered as dumps in many of our countries. They're like fish factories, and they engage a number of people. And coral reefs, of course. I used to do a lot of work with ocean-related hazards. And if you remember the Indian Ocean tsunami, it was very clear to us in the scientific community that the areas where there were very healthy coral reefs, that they had a much better, the people behind the coral reefs, landward of those coral reefs, had a much better chance of survival than in areas where the coral reefs had died or disappeared completely. This is an interesting statistic. Your pointer is not working very well, but a single shark at a point where scuba diving is very popular has a lifetime value of $1.9 million US. But if a fisherman catches that shark, its value is only $108 US. These are some of the considerations that we need to look at going forward. And these are really the considerations for the blue economy, in my opinion, and blue growth. We want to expand our economic base from the oceans. But I would argue that we still, especially in small island developing states, or as we heard this morning, large ocean developing states, we don't know enough about our ocean space to really get out there and begin making money before we know how our actions are going to affect our assets out there. And should we choose between one course of action and another for making money? How can we choose something that will take us in the right direction? So these are some of the issues that we need to consider. So I want to go straight to the benefits, and many of them have been mentioned already in the opening ceremony this morning. I won't go over these, but I might use them as examples as we go forward. Some of them are very pertinent to the Caribbean. Of course, tourism, energy, and others are perhaps in a more gestational phase. Some of the main themes that we are focusing on in the international community and at UN Environment Program in particular is, of course, we've heard a lot about climate change this morning. And are there any skeptics in the room? Personally, I can't imagine that anybody who has been living in the Caribbean region over the last 15 years would be questioning whether climate change is real or not. Even our rainfall patterns don't seem to be the same. I remember the days, and I'm not that old, I remember the days when I would see a gray cloud, I would say, okay, it's going to rain. The rain would fall for a period of, maybe half an hour, the sun would come out and life would go on. Now, you don't necessarily see a gray cloud, and the next thing, you have a flash flood. What happened? Because so much rain fell so hard in 10 minutes, it did the work that before perhaps 30 minutes to an hour of rain would do. We have some serious challenges ahead, and unless we understand the changes that are occurring, we're going to run ourselves into trouble with this blue growth, blue economy issue. The living marine resources. I know that Trinidad and Tobago's economy has been very much based on the non-living marine resources. But we've heard already this morning that the entire structure of the living marine resources is really a survival issue for us. So it's not something that can be ignored. And of course, we're gonna talk a little bit about fisheries later. Food security, of course, very important. Fish is an important protein source in the Caribbean region. And biodiversity can be sold, can be marketed for tourism on the one hand, or we can use it for food on the other. A major benefit. Demands for ocean space. How are you going to decide how to use a particular area of your ocean? Should I use it for oil and gas, or should I use it for wind energy? How are you going to make that decision? Is it only going to be based on money, the amount of money you can make, or is it going to be based on the assets that you have in that area? These are some of the questions that we need to ask. And then, land-based sources of marine pollution. Was it our esteemed master of ceremonies who said that our biggest problem is land-based sources of marine pollution? She's perfectly right, and it is by far, it's about 70% of the pollution that we are seeing in the ocean. So this is not minor at all. I believe, am I right, that Trinidad and Tobago is moving towards a ban on styrofoam and plastic bags? Or is that just a dream? Please tell me that it's happening. Little by little, we are seeing this wave spread across the Caribbean. And some of our sister islands have done it already, and I hope that you're moving in the same direction. It is absolutely essential. I believe that if we are to do this as a globe, that in 5 years' time, we can eliminate the use of single-use plastic bags, for example. And that is a major, major success for the ocean. And then you look at the cumulative impacts. How do all these problems that we're talking about come together? There are some people who are perhaps feeling the impacts of a poorly managed ocean, but they're not getting the benefits from the ocean. And we need to deal with that, because that fosters all kinds of issues, including crime. So we might, when we're trying to tackle crime, we might not be considering inequalities in terms of how benefits are distributed. And so because of the cumulative impacts, we must look at integrated management. That is crucial. But we can't delay. We must do something, and we've heard that. Urgent action, urgent action, urgent action. So, climate change. All of these things you probably know: sea surface temperature, sea level rise, salinity. And has anybody heard yet about a study? This is the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Is anybody studying the impact of climate change on the internet? It's not something that we've thought about yet, but imagine if, let me see if okay, it works this time. See those submarine cables that run on the ocean floor? Imagine if the impacts of climate change, the heating of the ocean, and all of the problems that we expect to happen as a consequence of climate change occurred, and those cables ruptured, do you know how much of our communications would go down? These are some of the things that we need to consider, and I think that, you know, first, we must build capacity in our policymakers to understand some of the implications of these things. So, it's getting hot in here. That's climate change. The amount of heat that the ocean has in it now is fueling changes in biological structure, loss, extinction of species. It's also sour. You've got ocean acidification because of all the carbon dioxide that the ocean is absorbing, and there's less oxygen involved in the ocean as well. So we know all about hurricanes. Trinidad is kind of on the edge, but I know sometimes you still get some impacts. Hurricane intensity is supposed to increase, and it's already increasing. We've seen that. In other words, the number of Category 3 hurricanes that we will experience in the world is going to increase, 3 and above, I should say. And I will talk about the impacts of sea level rise later. So, a healthy coral reef. But I have a feeling that my kids, who are 20 years old and 15, their kids will probably not see a Caribbean coral reef alive in their lifetime. That's a scary thing, because we've already lost 80% of the living coral reefs in our region. That's a major issue. It ends up looking like this every summer because the water is so hot. I remember in 1992 when I started as a junior officer at the Coastal Zone Management Unit, we used to go diving in wetsuits, full body, long sleeve, all the way. And by 2005, we could go swimming in the skimpiest swimsuit. At 60 feet deep, the temperature was 27 degrees Celsius. It was hot. We didn't need wetsuits anymore. And you can imagine that when you're dealing with living organisms that have such a narrow range of temperature tolerance, they're dying. They're dying, and much of the impact of this is man-made. So, another impact of climate change. Waves that in Barbados that look perfectly ordinary, they're not hurricane waves by any means, and you take a beach like the Crane Beach, some of you may know the Crane Beach from Barbados, that was listed among the top 10 beaches in the world for decades, ends up looking like this. And that's the rest of the beach. So what do we have to market? We can constantly change political parties and put them in as in the government and say this one is not doing good and that one is not doing good. But the truth is, who has the answer to something like this? Which politician has the answer to something like this? And these are some of the issues. So, this was our messenger in Barbados at the Coastal Zone Management Unit. He's about 6 feet, maybe 5 feet 11. And can you imagine the amount of sand that was lost from this beach? To allow him to stand next to an eroded beach, and and you see the tourists perched up on top there? I mean, will those tourists come back to Barbados? We hope so. But it may be a hit or miss. Then, because of the erosion, then you have to put in artificial infrastructure to stabilize the beach. Shoreline stabilization is very expensive. But there are some governments that say, like Barbados, we don't have a choice because tourism is our business. We sell beaches. If we don't have them, we have nothing to sell. So, you do a $20 million program for projects like this. You have a coastal road that is a major artery between the capital and the airport. And because of the erosion on the beach, the water started to go under the road. And eventually, the road would just fall in. And so, they had to do this project This is an architect's rendering of the project in order to widen the beach. $7 million. Now, this is money that could have gone for a new hospital or to deal with welfare programs. But these are the decisions that our policymakers have to make. And we can blame one politician or another because they're not doing a good job with managing the economy. But we don't realize some of the issues that they're dealing with. And they don't realize, unfortunately, when they're on the political platform, what they're going to have to deal with when they get into power either. But we just need to keep these things in mind. I think education, to my mind, education is the key. An ocean of waste. Unfortunately, when I do these presentations, I say I talk a lot of garbage. I don't have a choice but to talk garbage, because right now that's what our ocean is about, garbage. Y'all are driving your wonderful cars. I see some lovely cars here in Trinidad, actually. But this is the fate of your tires, because this is what people do in the marine environment. Hopefully, we've been able to eradicate dynamite fishing out of the Caribbean, but it still happens in the Pacific and in some areas of the Indian Ocean. I hope that we have eradicated it from the Caribbean. And this is just a final picture of basically a healthy coral reef going from healthy to dead, from left to right. Our tourists, basically what we're trying to do is to control human behavior. Standing on a coral reef flat that is close to the shoreline is going to kill the coral. But when we were allowing our tourists to do this, we didn't know. We didn't know any different. Our factories are discharging directly into the water. And they're discharging Lord knows what. Now, it's possible they might just be discharging wastewater that has a little bit of sugar in it. But you would be amazed the impact of just that sugar on the development of algae, which blocks the light from coral reefs and causes the corals to starve. That's all it takes. We know that people like to buy corals. I think that in the international community we've been able to work on this quite a bit, and we have a lot less of coral for sale. And then we have the invasive species, a ship that takes up ballast water off the coast of Africa and brings it across to the Caribbean and dumps it, and lo and behold, we end up with organisms in our waters that we never expected to have. And because they're new to the new environment, they create havoc because they have no predators, maybe, and this is the lionfish, of course. I hope you've heard of the lionfish invasion in the Caribbean and all of the problems we've had with it, with our reef fish. So, marine biota, big problems. I'll jump over this because we've heard so much about it this morning already. But we need to focus also on, like what the Minister of State was saying about the coastal communities. It's still about people, and there are livelihoods. When we begin to put controls in place, we need to remember that they affect ordinary people. And so small-scale fisheries, the livelihoods of people who work in the mangroves, etc. These are challenges that need to be addressed. And so that's one of the reasons for the integrated approach to ocean management. So I'm going to jump. Inputs of harmful materials, and we have reached the end of the road where human impacts are small in relation to the vastness of the ocean. We really have, because now the impacts that we have been creating are basically outstripping the size, the ocean size. Because we've got the ship-generated waste, the debris, the nutrients, the overfishing, the climate change. It's just too much. So we need urgent action, but there's an information gap. Everybody needs to be educated. And this year, we had the Ocean Conference, and following so soon after the Paris Climate Agreement, we've got ordinary people for the first time, in my opinion, having worked in the Caribbean for so long, talking about the ocean, talking about the impact of a plastic bag that ends up in a gully, that ends up in the ocean. We've never had that before. In fact, I was I almost teared up this morning when I heard a head of state being so passionate about the ocean, because that is not usual. That's not what I have seen in the last 25 years. So it's wonderful to see the message spreading more and more as we give more information. So capacity building, and I was also impressed to hear the closing remarks, where the role and mandate of schools like the UTT are emphasized. So, what are we? The Cartagena Convention for the Protection and Development of the Marine Environment of the Wider Caribbean Region. Can you tell me when I only have 5 minutes left, please? We are the only legally binding regional agreement among member states of the Caribbean for the protection and development. And I know that we tend to forget the development part, because really governments are going to do that anyway. We have to focus a lot on the protection part. So there are 3 protocols under the convention, and the convention is just a little bit over 30 years old. And we have 25 parties, from the United States in the north to Venezuela in the south. And we encompass everybody from east to west, so -3 at the moment. The convention area just has 3 countries that have not yet ratified, but they're working on it. So we have the pollution from oil spills, pardon me. We have the pollution from oil spills, oil spills pollution protocol, which we work jointly with the International Maritime Organization on. And we have this protocol on specially protected areas and wildlife, and we have the land-based sources of marine pollution protocol. I know that Trinidad and Tobago has ratified the convention and the protocols and has been working with us and with their other member states parties to implement the provisions of the convention. Now, this is a map showing the regional seas conventions, of which the Cartagena Convention is one. And of course, the Cartagena Convention is this area right here. This shows the convention area. Now, the United Nations Environment Assembly passed a resolution last year suggesting that member states who are members of conventions should consider the extension of the convention area to include neighboring areas. As you can see, in this convention, we don't have an area beyond national jurisdiction in the Caribbean Sea. However, if we were to extend the convention area towards the Atlantic Ocean, we would move into an area beyond national jurisdiction. And this is something that the member states of the Cartagena Convention are considering at the moment. So, these are all the member states. The 3 in red are the 3 that are working on their ratification papers now. So, Article 5, pollution from ships. Article 7, pollution, land-based sources of marine pollution. Article 6, dumping at sea. Article 8, seabed activities. Article 9 deals with air pollution, and Article 10 deals with biodiversity. And I encourage you to have a look at the convention, because it's really for you and for your children and grandchildren. So the mission is really to promote regional cooperation, to provide a platform for discussion and for shared action among member states of the region. And of course, this is what the speakers this morning have been calling for. So that's why I say that the convention is really a framework for ocean governance already. And it is also to achieve sustainable development of the resources that allows for economic growth and sustainable livelihoods. So the Sustainable Development Goals that were approved in New York, they're supposed to be implemented all at the same time. That's a tall order, because there's a lot to do, especially in our region. And of course, life below water, which is goal 14, is the one that we focus on because that deals with the ocean. But goal 6 deals with pollution. Goal 13 deals with climate change. Goal 11 deals with sustainable cities and human settlements. And we have to deal with all of those things. Airports, seaports. When we landed in St. Martin yesterday evening, I thought we were landing in the water. And every time I go in there, I think, oh no, this is the time we're going to go in the water. Because so many of our airports in the Caribbean are coastal. And so anything that, erosion, high sea level rise, all of those things are going to affect our major infrastructure. And so we need to deal with this issue of pollution. I like this photo because this is the reality that we live with, where you have controls in place, you have legislation, and these things still happen. Revenues are down. Land-based sources of plastic entering the Caribbean Sea in 2010 were huge, and by a number of different ways as well. Effects on women heading households, effects on children, it continues. So I see our challenges as those four: money, capacity, engagement, and information. And the truth is that our success factors for enhancing ocean governance are the same. We need to come up with innovative financing mechanisms. We need to partner with the private sector who make money. Governments make money, yes, from taxes and so on, but they have a lot to do with the money. We need to partner with the private sector. You're making money from this resource, you need to spend money to protect the resource. That should be a standard thing in the Caribbean, where if you make money from the resource, you spend money to protect the resource. Our tourism players have gotten rich, many of them, from the marine environment, from the coastal environment. What have they given back to protect those resources? And in some cases, their own actions have degraded the resource. We need to build capacity. We need to train. We need to have partnerships. I talked about partnership with the private sector. And we need to increase information. So this is how we look at the tiers of the Sustainable Development Goals, where the bottom, which deals with goal 14 and 15, life on water, life on land. We need to protect the resources on which the zero poverty and all of the others rests. And moving forward towards looking at the blue economy and blue growth, we need to agree together, private sector, civil society, government, international organizations, on integrated targets that we can all work towards. And I see CARICOM as our regional integration as a very strong basis on which we can go forward to be successful in this endeavor. We need investments to improve our quality of life and asset base while we're doing the protection. And we need to develop financing and sustainability plans, provide incentives, fiscal incentives for the private sector to come on board. And moving forward, training, and more training. Capacity development, more and more capacity development. Strengthen engagement with civil society. We need the science, research. We need to understand this great resource that we have, that is the ocean. It was, it is, and it will always be about people. Thank you.